Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Public Works, Finance, and Safety Committee meeting of Monday, October 1st, 2018. First item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Y, second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. The next item is number 2, public input. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak about something that's not on the agenda? I don't see anybody, so move on to item 3, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion and second?
So moved.
Moved by Vilhauer, second by Mantee. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 4 is consideration of change order number 1, final, for the 2018 seal coating project number 1815 with Bituminous Paving, Inc. for an increase of $2,230.98, bringing the total contract amount to $175,633.98. I'll look for a motion and second for approval. We've got motion by Bueller, second by Lallam, and I would like to invite Rob, I think, to come up and tell us about this project.
Thank you, Mayor. What the deal was here is originally planned that we were going to chip seal First Avenue North, and the tire rutting's getting pretty bad on First Avenue North. So what we did is switched it to another stretch that needed a seal coat, and that was Kemp Avenue from Highway 81 to 19th Street East. So there was a slight difference in quantity, and that's where the extra $2,230.98 came into play.
Okay. Any questions for Rob? Councilman Lallam?
Rob, are we going to be, I adjusted that. Are they going to be doing First Avenue next year then, or we have another plan for that?
We want to look at doing a mill and overlay on that. The tire rutting has gotten pretty bad over the last few years, and it's continuing to get worse. So instead of just putting a chip over it, it's at least the driving lanes due for a mill and overlay.
Okay.
That is the original surface that was put on back in the 90s when they did the First Avenue storm sewer system. So it's been a while.
Time then.
It's time.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll look for action. This is for recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Rob. Item number 5 is consideration of change order number 1 for the Uptown Alley Reconstruction Project number 1807 with Crestone Builders, Inc. for an increase of $1,407.03, bringing the total contract amount to $196,228.03. And I'll look for a motion and second for recommendation of approval.
So moved.
Moved by Y, second by Mantee. Heath, you want to explain this?
Absolutely, Mayor. Those are a lot more sensitive, aren't they? Yeah. The main purpose behind this change order before you this evening is mainly for tree removal along this project. There was a tree that was adjacent to the new pavement, and a large portion of the root structure of that tree had to be removed. And rather than risking losing the whole tree later on due to wind, Colin decided to have the whole tree removed. That's what the additional funds are for.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep. Any questions? Comments from anyone? All right, look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 6 is consideration of change order number 3, final, for the Watertown Regional Landfill Stormwater Improvements Project number 1818 with Rounds Construction for an increase of $2,887.14, bringing the new contract amount to $419,158.57. I'll look for a motion second for approval.
So moved.
Moved by Albertson, second by Lallam. Yeah, these microphones are a little bit live. And who's going to talk about this? Heath, do you want to? Or we have Mike?
Mike is here. He's got the intimate details on this project, having been out in the field with it on a daily basis. I'll let him cover the details of it.
Thanks. Yes, so this is the final change order, and we're simply adjusting the bid item quantities to the actual work performed in the field. So along the east perimeter of the landfill, 166 additional feet of existing silt fence was removed at a cost of $132.80, and another 168 feet of new silt fence was added at a cost of $441.84. So the silt fence total was $574.64. And then as they dredged the sediment out of that east sed pond, they encountered an additional 250 cubic yards. They determined the design quantities by probing a pond, and that sediment blanket down there at the bottom is very soft at the top and dense at the bottom. So they encountered more silt to remove. That came at a cost of $2,312.50. For, as the mayor said, a total additional cost of $2,887.14. And have any questions?
All right, anybody have any questions? Doesn't look like it. Thanks, Mike. I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries.
I would think sewer, water, storm, yeah, I mean, all that stuff just has to keep working.
Yeah, we need that to work. Item number 7 is discussion on Home Rule Charter Ordinance, Chapter 7-19. And Matt and Kristen, Kristen's going to take this, I think.
Okay, well, Matt and I together will kind of cover this, but teamwork. So, the Home Rule Charter Commission will meet starting next year. But before that happened, we wanted to look over the ordinance that currently kind of establishes the time frame, the number of members and stuff. And I think what we wanted to do in the Finance, Public Works Committee, all of this, is to have the discussion if we think there's things in the ordinance that need to be changed. I highlighted a few of the items. I hope the yellow shows up that I think we need to discuss. The one biggest thing is the 21 members. There's been some discussion, is that too many members to have on a commission? Sometimes when we have, a group of people, it's hard to get that many together all on the same page. So I think that's an item of discussion we'd like to have. The other big thing is that we noticed how this is established, and Matt informed me that the ordinance says that we meet every 5 years, but it also states that in the Home Rule Charter. So the changing it from 5, the suggestion has been to 6 years, and the reason that I'm kind of suggesting the 6, and there again, the commission would have to be the one to decide that. But if we establish it at 6 years, it would always fall on an election with the city. So the way it's written right now, there is the potential at 5 years where you would have to hold a special election. So I don't know if we want to do that, where we'd hold a special election for a change. Otherwise, if we change it to the very last section, when it says the report by the commission, the 7.1906, they would have to have their first kind of discussion to the council by April, and then their final decision at the first meeting in May. What that would allow for is time to make it onto the ballot of the June election. So with that, I'll kind of open up discussion.
So
Anybody?
an action at the beginning of May would give enough time to put it on the
would.
ballot?
What we did is we went out and we looked at the election calendar that's provided by South Dakota Municipal League, and based off of when council, mayor, all those positions go out to start their petitions, and then when they're due back, it's right along the same time frame. So as long as the commission would have a decision or an item that they want to be voted on to us by the first meeting of May, we would have time to work with the county, who helps us get the ballots ready to get that on the election ballot.
So we would change from the second council meeting in July to the first council meeting in May.
Nope, so the first,
The August would change to May.
yep, so the first one, July would
July would
change
change
to
to April.
April. Yep, and August to May.
And that just becomes
the
an
council
ordinance
has to-
change.
That is just the ordinance change. The only one that the council couldn't change that I discussed was the 5-year. The commission would be the one that would have to determine that change. Right now, as it stands, because it's 19, if the council changed it, the dates for April and May, we'd be okay to get it onto the regular election for 2019. This ordinance would allow for that, but going forward, the 5 years would become an even year, so.
Okay, Councilman Danforth.
And I'm somewhat putting myself in a position of a new council member or a mayor, a new mayor coming into the office, but we did talk once about changing the date for the election. We had discussion for consideration, changing the date for the mayor and council elections, moving that up. So that was done, and those positions were in place for the start of the budget process versus coming in, a third of the way into it. And Mayor, you got the most recent experience with that and the difficulty of that coming into a budget that's basically a month and a half or 2 months already in advance of you as far as the direction that's been set. And then it really becomes that first year is kind of your budget, the finance officer's budget, because of the experience. And I will say, from a council standpoint, when I first came on, that was really hard for me because not only do you have to learn the budget process, but now there's already been discussions and everything that's all taken place, and now you have a change order of personnel. So I think that should be part of this consideration, or at least part of our discussion is, do we also move the election up so that it facilitates new members of council, new member, a potential new mayor in that budgeting process? So I throw that out before we make that decision or set a direction here that we should either consider it or just throw it out and say it's not important one way or the other. So
We have options for election times, don't we, Kristen?
You do, and I don't have the sheet with me. I think one of the reasons why we've done it in June as we have is, I think for one, a little bit of the tie to the finance office too, with the finance office running it. It's a good time because you're through the audit and you're not too far into the budget. So it's kind of like the finance office's, I would say, least busy time. The other thing too is when there is school board things, we have partnered with them, and that one is the only time that they could jump on with us. Otherwise, I think they would have to always have their own. I think yeah, unless they did their own. So that was part of the reason too, is it kind of allowed us to join with them if they have a vote that needs to be handled. We've always stayed away from going with the county, and that's just for the confusion aspects of it, because they would have to try, there's city things that then somebody outside of city limits can't vote on, and it would get a little messy. So there's kind of the draw there on the election.
And that's not incorporated into our charter at all, those election dates. And if we were to change the election date, then this whole discussion about having the charter review give their report, yeah, we'd have to go back. We'd probably have to start in the year prior.
Yep.
Councilman Vilhauer?
A number, whoa, that is. Okay, let's try it again. A number of comments. I know, Mike, you and I have talked about that. In reflecting on that, I really question if that extra time that we're buying as far as changing the election is going to be worth it versus all the confusion that we're going to be causing by changing our city election, especially if we try to combine it with the school election. So, I've kind of had a flip-flop of change of thought on that I'd probably be inclined to leave the, municipal election where it is currently. So that's just my 2 cents worth on that. Just kind of going through the ordinance, just a few comments. As to the number of members, I've had a couple different conversations. One, I didn't ask for permission to use his name, so I won't, but he's kind of a geek that looks at these sorts of things, and he said ideally the best number of people for a committee, in his opinion, would be that 8 to 12. Okay, so that would be an argument for changing it from where we are right now at 21. Okay, that was one conversation. Just this morning, I visited with Jim Roby, whose name I did have permission to use. I promised I wouldn't misquote him to any significant degree, but Jim chaired this committee the last time around. I asked him, I said, 21 members, how was that to work with? He said his problem was trying to find a time, and Brad, you were on that committee, weren't you? His comment was it was hard to find a time for the group to meet. That was a problem. He said, overall, though, it did go smoothly. He appreciated the input. He felt like they were getting a broad-based section of the community as far as being represented. So his comment was that it went smoothly or worked well. I guess you can weigh that into consideration here for you know, as far as changing that, the number of members. Just curious, Mayor, what kind of response, I know you've been putting a plug in for the last several months already, as far as volunteers that would be willing to serve in that committee?
I've had a pretty good response. People are willing to serve. It's a finite period of time. It's not an endless committee that you're committing to for years and years. So I don't think that there will be a problem finding 2 people from each ward plus a floater to serve on it.
Anyway, prior to my conversation with Mr. Roby this morning, I felt inclined too that 21 was maybe too many to have on this committee, but after listening to Jim's comments, that I'd probably be inclined to suggest that we keep the number where we've got it, with 2 appointed by each of us or nominated by each of us plus the mayor. So that's my thought on that. A couple other comments now. Looking at that first paragraph, if we're looking at probably trying to compress the time or speed up the process, a thought, if we look at the last sentence, that first paragraph, commission nominations will be presented to City Council at the first meeting in February. Well, why couldn't we change that to January? And we can do our work yet this fall to get our committee nominations in place, and then have the committee ready to roll right out of the chute our first meeting in January. So that would be a suggestion on my part, that we look at changing that part of it to January rather than February. You know, as to the report by commission on the second page of that ordinance, you know, I think too that we need to definitely change that so we can incorporate any changes that might be coming out of this committee, so that we can act on it at the election. Now, Matt, I do have a question, because I know we had this conversation a few months ago. I just want to make sure, when it says the next scheduled general citywide election, that's not the general election like we have in the fall. In other words, our June election does meet that criteria.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay, but we would definitely have to look at changing some dates like you and Kristen had thrown out, or as far as the report of the commission. So that's my comments as far as looking at the ordinance that you know dictates the operation of the Home Rule Charter.
Councilwoman?
Does anybody recall how far ahead of time the materials were given to the members of that committee? I was thinking there wasn't a very long time, like it was passed out the first day. Is that right, Brad? I believe so. Yeah, so, well, 2 times ago, Greg was actually on that committee as well, and that was one of the things he said, was that it was really hard to absorb all of that information in such a short period of time. So we may want to think about getting the process of selecting the members and then getting the information into their hands a little faster than what we did the last time. I mean, if that's possible to do it a month earlier, and then have that material in their hands, give them time to come with ready to roll you know, with questions and with their, you know, because the people who served took it seriously. So, you know, as Jim said, so I think that, and I would guess that some days they only ended up with 10 to 8 members because of, you know, attendance issues. But that was the one thing that I had heard several times about, the fact that that was a lot to just look at and absorb.
Right, yes, it's an important thing that they're doing, and they want to make the right decision.
Yeah, they took it seriously.
You want to have plenty of time to mull it over. Anybody else have anything they want to weigh in on? Councilman Lallam?
Mayor,
You want it, Don?
those are public meetings, all of them are
Yes, they're all
public
public
meetings.
meetings.
So I remember thinking 21 did seem like a lot. If the idea was to reduce that, just a reminder, those are open to public, and they'll ask questions and you can have input. So you don't lose a lot of public input if we do decide to reduce the number.
True.
Yeah, I would just comment on that as well, though. Even though there's 21 named, currently the quorum is 11, and so if you reduce the number, you'd probably reduce the quorum. So then you could end up with a situation where the recommendation comes from less than the number of council members that there are.
It's possible, yep. Councilman Lallam?
Okay, I just have a couple questions since I didn't do this last time. So each council person will recommend two names, is that how it works?
You each give two names. They come from you.
Okay, and then they're voted on as a complete group, is that,
I
or sort of?
I think they're just appointed. You
appointed.
get to appoint,
Okay.
every council person gets to appoint two,
Yeah,
and I
'cause
get to appoint
I was
one.
looking through here and I'm just like, well, how do you get two people on there? And, you know, what's the qualifications? Look like they have to be registered in your ward and obviously citizens in the city limits of Watertown, correct? And willing to serve, obviously. Yeah. Okay,
Right.
all right, that's my question.
Anyone else? Councilman Bueller?
Yes, I'd just like to say, I agree with, that we should stay with 21 people. And I do believe that's going to be really important because of that quorum needed, the 11-person quorum. To get all those folks, would they have 4 meetings? I think it's 4 meetings.
You have to have at least 4.
Minimum, so, yeah. And I think, as I recall, it's been a while back, but I do recall that it was kind of difficult, I think, to get everybody there to all the meetings, so.
I think that's why it's important to have as much material for them as soon as possible, because they can, you know, get through that in those 4 meetings. So you've got a really short period of time to digest a lot of information.
I wonder who compiled the information. Does anybody recall?
It was just a
Did it come
copy
from
of-
finance?
It probably came from a combination of finance and the attorney.
Finance and attorney?
Because Matt will be the liaison on.
Okay. Councilman Lallam?
I'm gonna try not to yell on this one. Is the council going to these meetings at all? I mean,
They're open to the public,
open, but we have
and
no official capacity in
Right.
the meetings, correct?
it can't be an elected official
Okay,
on the committee,
I'm just
so-
wondering if one of us, or we didn't want to have too many of us go to the actual
No, any
meetings.
public meeting, you can have a quorum as long as you're not meeting for, you don't get together and make decisions.
Official capacity, got it.
Councilman Danforth?
You know, I look back almost 5 years ago when that was our first review, right, 5 years into this. And the thing that struck me as really odd at the time is once the committee was formed, even though they're public meetings, we were encouraged, per se, to not participate in those meetings. And because of potential influence that you may have. And that's not what the intent is. But the fallacy to that is a number of the issues that we've already talked about and are yet to be talked about and should be considered are items that the people on that committee most likely aren't even going to know are issues. The council needs to they have to have a voice in that somewhere. Now, not a directive, but a voice of what we see some of the issues are. We're the ones closest to most of that. We need to have a mechanism to express those thoughts, those concerns without being directives. And that, I think, was missing the first time around on this thing, in my opinion.
Councilman Bueller?
I agree with Mike. I think, for us to maybe put some bullets together, and I don't know if the first meeting is kind of a onboarding type of thing. I don't know. But if we had those bullets, if we did put those concerns or questions together for that group, I think that at that time, if we looked at it in that fashion, kind of on board, get these folks up to speed on what it is, what the expectations are, and here's some things for consideration.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Just, I mean, we've had this, I mean, this isn't the first time we've had this conversation the last few months. I mean, that was the understanding that we as a collective body, or we as individually, would do some homework throughout the course of the fall, and then bring some recommendations together that we would then hand off to this committee. So, I mean, yes, we've kicked this around, and that's still, I think, at least on my agenda, to do some homework, contacting other municipalities as far as things that may or may not work in their community. So I would ask that we all do some of that throughout the course of the next couple of months, so that we can have suggestions to hand off then when the time comes.
Yes, thank you. Councilwoman Manti?
Question for Matt. Can that be structured in a way that it's not, doesn't become an official document? Like if it's, or is it official once we put it together and give it to them, even though they don't have to look at it, they can throw it away or whatever, but it's what they were talking about, Mike, too, things that we've noticed or are concerned about. Do you understand what they're saying? Like, they're saying like hand out everybody a bullet pointed sheet of suggestions that the council has perhaps just, considerations or whatever that the council has perhaps given to you as the liaison, and it could be passed out as, please take a look at these things in regards to where you're going with it. I mean, is that doable? Because they could throw it away if they wanted to. I mean, or does it become part of the official meeting?
I guess I don't see any reason why you couldn't make your opinions known necessarily. I think the best way to go about it would be to whoever the chairman ends up being, Jim Roby was this last time, give that person the direction that, hey, here's some issues that the council and staff maybe have seen that may want to be addressed. That way that person in leading those meetings can steer the conversation towards the issues that may or may not be wanted to be addressed by the commission.
Councilman Lallam?
My only question, or maybe just comments, is that if we are allowed to go, say, sit in the audience, if they were to have questions, they could ask direct questions to a council member. That's I don't want to influence any decision. That I want that to be as independent as possible. But if they have a question, is this something that you've seen, or is this something that, how has this affected you, or something along those lines, that they have the option to ask a question to one of the 10 of us.
Yeah,
that would be my
think, right.
you know.
That seems natural. And Brad, were council members there, and did they get questioned?
They brought in the past couple mayors. I think there was a council person or two there. I don't know, but they weren't ever asked any questions.
Okay. Councilman Bueller?
I don't know, do we open a public hearing for this at all? At any time during these meetings?
Commission meetings.
Well, it's a public meeting.
Yeah. But
guess I'm not
typically without a public hearing, the only time you would allow input is if you had a question.
Correct.
For somebody in the audience.
Correct, yeah.
Right. And minutes are held, and I would imagine the publishing requirements that all public bodies have to adhere to would be followed. Councilman Vilhauer?
Assuming, taking our input along with your own thoughts, will we now be seeing at our next meeting, the a draft of an ordinance for a first reading, or kind of walk us through the process as far as changes to the ordinance, not the home rule charter review, but the ordinance itself?
Yeah, I guess we were just looking for a direction from the council as to how those changes should come forward. I mean, they would come forward just like an ordinance change, first reading and second reading, assuming everybody's on the same page with what we kind of talked about.
And
So I do have one other question there. if I
Okay,
might.
Councilman
The-
Bueller.
The process for this, I don't know, I'm not sure how we do that. Would we, I mean, I would assume each of us would study again, which most of us probably read the home rule charter more than once, but would we review that and then each one individually bring that to you, Matt? Or would there be a group, some small group that we could meet to do that? I don't know what the right process might be for that. Because somehow or another, we're gonna have to get these concerns or suggestions to you.
You mean the suggestions not on the ordinance change, but on the actual commission topics?
Those bullet points we discussed earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to be the repository for those thoughts. I mean, we all obviously can't meet as a group besides in here. And so if anybody wants to submit things in writing to me, that's fine. Or I can meet with small groups of council to have those discussions and record your thoughts. It's really, up to you as to how you wanted to communicate that to me.
Okay, Councilman Danforth?
Here probably a couple months ago when we met to discuss the beginning of this process for the ordinance review related to home rule charter, and then concerns that I know others have had in this. I thought at that meeting what we were going to present to the council was to get a group from representative here with some staff to sit down and identify the items, what we felt should be considered and why, and then present that back to the council for additional input and to finalize that. Are we not going to do that now? Now we're going to do it as 10 or 11 or X number of people? Or
We could still do that. It is October, and any changes are going to require 2 meetings. And then to the ordinance.
right, I think the ordinance becomes.
No, he's talking about,
What we talked about, but 2 things. Some of the things we talked about at that meeting was an ordinance
Okay, the
change.
supporting
Other
documents.
was for recommendation for consideration
okay,
of home rule charter changes.
right.
It just seems to me like if 11 of us either do or don't think about it and present something and present it in different ways, it seems like it could get a little bit messy or helter-skelter from Matt or whoever the gatekeeper of this is. It seemed like we should have a unified approach to this, and that would be a small committee, whatever that number is of us, presenting that back to the council, just so that everybody understands, ask questions, and we can make changes, and then that's what gets presented as a unified body to Matt. That would ultimately go to the committee chair and the committee, again, not as a requirement, but as consideration from our perspective.
So but you'd want to be able to have all the notes and everything put together by the end of the year, so that if the folks if we do change the ordinance and they're appointed at the first meeting in January, they need their materials pretty.
I think we
shortly
pretty much
after that.
know what those issues are. That, I'm not sure what else would get added to that, but
Yeah.
we could bring that up. And I think then becomes the formalization of those items, those bullet points, along with, a justification or a reasoning for why we feel it is something that should be considered. I don't think that would take that long for us to do, quite frankly.
No, probably the time-consuming part would be talking to other communities who have changed their form of government, or have whatever it is that we're considering or wanting to be considered, reaching out to them and hearing back from them and compiling the information. That would be the time consuming, not just coming up with the idea of what you want the group to consider. Councilman Vilhauer?
I guess on a related vein there, I think too that naming a few of us along with key staff to be kind of the spear, or the not quite sure the right word is, but to start compiling this information, bring it to Matt and bring it to us as a collective body at this setting at a committee meeting, to vet out or to hear what the group has come up with as far as suggestions. We can kick it around as a group here, and by the end of the year then have those suggestions ready to formulate, to be ready to hand off then to the actual committee then that kicks in the first part of next year. But you're right, Mike, I think absent somebody of this group along with staff working on that in the meantime, I got a feeling nothing's going to happen to speak of. So I think too that naming a few of us would be a good idea to keep the ball rolling on this.
Yeah,
and then keep the rest of the group in the loop on it.
Yeah, you'd mentioned about discussing some things with other communities. Well, we don't want Glenn doing that on his own and Dan doing it with the same people and Mike doing it or Beth, and it's not a coordinated effort on that where they go, you just got a call from Glenn Vilhauer, because we're most likely, I think that has to be for some of those issues, and I think those are pretty minor. There's a couple of them that that would undoubtedly need to be a coordinated effort.
Mayor.
Yes.
So.
Councilman Bueller?
No, I would agree. I think it's a good idea. I think that we should form a committee to kind of be the clearinghouse for this, and then we can all supply the different concerns that we might have individually through that group. I think that's a good idea.
Yep. Anyone else have anything to add? It's good discussion. Okay, I'll send an email out and see. Did you want to say something?
No, just that.
Matt? Okay. Yes, and the ordinance will, if there would be any changes, obviously, to the ordinance, they have to go through the process.
Just a clarification, that'll be running independent of what we do as far as
Right.
reaching out and doing our homework or whatever in the meantime.
Right.
Mayor,
Okay.
Mayor, Matt, is the number of council members dictated by ordinance or by home rule charter? Home rule charter, isn't it?
Home rule charter.
Okay, because I don't know why, but I want to talk about that just for a second. I know that's been thrown about a number of times since I've been on the council as to how do you have a community the size of Watertown and you have 10 council members? I don't know. I mean, it's been 10 since I rose my hand and got a petition, and that's where we're at. Doesn't mean it's right, and doesn't mean it's wrong, but I will say that I can only think maybe once or twice since I've been on the council that we were absent a quorum of a formal council meeting. So it's not a matter of getting a quorum, in my opinion, but I do think our council is very active, not just in evaluating the budget and approving contracts and budget items and working with ordinance changes. We take a very hands-on approach to dealing with issues and assisting city staff on issues that constituents maybe have concerns with or things that we deal with. My concern in reducing the number is that we reduce the voice of the people within a given ward, but also dispersing, if that level of work is going to be maintained at a council level, and putting that level of work on fewer people is a concern of mine. But I know that it keeps coming up periodically, and we haven't discussed it. I know that we haven't, but interesting if anybody else's thoughts on that. Or the other issue I also heard was realignment of how the wards are set up. But any thoughts on that from any other council members or the mayor staff?
Councilman Vilhauer?
And I've heard those same comments, and I think I've heard them directly from you, Mayor, on different occasions too, comments that you've made. Not that you were necessarily making that suggestion, but you just threw the idea out. And I know it's been publicized in the public opinion. I can think of a column that was written, probably a couple different columns that was written within the last year. One an editorial, and one I believe was, I shouldn't say that, one may have been Brad Johnson, but I'm not sure on that. But I know there was at least one that specifically made that comment about, hey, do we look at changing the number of our council members? I share those same concerns. I'd be curious to know what other communities do have as far as members on the council. But, right, I mean, there's a lot more that goes on in the work that we do other than sitting here and making decisions twice a month. And you start to cut down that number, and we try to do the same amount of work. All of a sudden, you've got less bodies trying to do the same amount of work. And as we all know, this is not a twice a month, 3-4 hour job. It's a lot more than that. So I too am reluctant to look at changing the number of members that we have on this group.
Well, I have to say this, there are some council members that put in very long hours serving the public, and to reduce the number of people that actually come to all their committee assignment meetings and then do homework as well and report back, that would be a hardship to try and spread that on fewer people. But I've lived and worked in a community that was, you know, much larger than Watertown, and had 5 wards, 5 council members representing each of those wards, plus 2 at large, and that just seemed normal. I think that is more typical, and it seemed to work. But I guess that's a community decision. There's pros and cons either way. Councilwoman?
When I looked at some of those same questions, because I had been approached by Sioux Falls is in a similar situation. They have less council members than we do for a larger city. But then if you take and break it down on a meeting by meeting, case by case, task by task level, there is more staff to do that, meaning that by the time the council gets to the council meetings, they're really in a specifically set them up and knock them down decision-making process. Yes, there's some discussion, but by the time they get to the meetings, and this was a discussion I had with one, it's been all pretty much worked out. Do you know what I'm saying? So they're not going to the same kind of committee meetings that all of us are going to. I had thought about, you know, having at least, you know, okay, I'm going to use my ward, for example. It's a very small ward. It's primarily a very big mix of industrial and commercial, small areas of residential. And at times, I wonder if it wouldn't be better to have one council member and one at large. You know, I mean, so there are some options, you know, just to get the quality of people we need on the council. Not saying that people in Ward C aren't good quality. I'm saying that sometimes that's a little more difficult. But I'm wondering if in bigger cities that have access to a lot more staff and a lot more, you know, with city managers and all those kind of things that have already like kind of laid things out. Does that make sense? And then the council gets to the meeting, it's chaired, and, you know, if you watch one on TV, there's, you know, every once in a while they get going on something, but for the most part, they know what they're gonna, you know.
Mayor.
Right. Councilman Bueller?
I absolutely believe that the number that we have right now would be the way to continue, because I think with a larger group like this, I think we can be more effective. I mean, we can kind of spread out some of the work, and everybody's situation in this group, most of us are different. You know, some of us have full-time jobs, some folks are retired, and that's going to go on for as long as we have city councils. So some people have more time that they can dedicate to the different issues than others. And but to allow us to be more effective and give people the opportunity to work on, to do a good job at working on specific committees instead of being spread out all over the place, I think the number is the right number. And I like the 2 people. As far as the at-large thing, I think that's worth looking at. But I think the number is right.
Councilman Roby?
I met a mayor of a Minnesota city, bigger than ours, and she asked me how many council members we had, and I said 10, and she fell off her chair. It is a large number, and I've always had that question in the back of my mind, is it too many people? And I'm just going to echo a little bit what Beth said. I think it depends on your form of government. That's kind of where I've come to. And if we change our form of government one way or the other, I think that would influence where we'd go with that decision.
Good point. Anyone else? Councilman Danforth?
The only comment I would make that is I agree with Beth, is that I think one of the big differences is our staffing and structure, and that will dictate a lot as to how much your council's actually involved in the day-to-day. And this council, for the most part, is pretty darned active in the day-to-day that, for the most part, doesn't get seen or noticed by the public that we do those things. I agree with Bruce, but if I were to make one change, I would reduce it by one, and I would have 4 wards, 2 representatives, and 1 at large within the community, so that you had an odd number, not an even number. Because if you get everybody coming to the meetings, and we get into a gridlock here, Mayor, you're the one in certain cases that makes the decisive vote, right? And I think that in most cases, that should be the council. And so if you were going to make a change.
For the record, I've never had to do that.
No, I know that. I know. That's because we tell people not to come so that we have an odd number. No, but I'm just saying, structurally, we're set up for the mayor to make the tie, assuming everybody was perfect in our attendance. And whereas I'm saying, I think your council should be, if we're going to make a change, it should be an odd number. And you have 1 at large, 4 wards, 2 representatives from each. But I'm good with where we're at. Oftentimes I ask the question of people is, what is it that's driving your concern over the number of council members? And all I ever get is, well, Omaha's only got 7. Well, okay, or Sioux Falls has whatever, or so-and-so, and I'm going, okay, well, what does that mean? I don't know. I never really get to what the concern is. You just get the expression that we have too many. So, my point.
I think they have trouble getting people to run. I think that's part of the issue.
Well, go us. We don't have that problem. Anything else? Okay, good discussion. We'll move on. Oh,
So you're gonna send an email
I'll send an email.
out to us regarding some volunteers for this?
Yep. Item number 8 is overview of the 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. And Finance Officer Kristen Bobzien will tell us all about this.
Okay, well, I'm going to try my best. Tonight at the council meeting, Troy with William Neal, who's the auditor, will be here to go over the actual audit. But I did have a request to just kind of go over the CAFR, as we call it, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and just to point out a few things. I'm sure you've all read it front to back, but I just wanted to touch on a few things. So, kind of the way the CAFR is set up is one of the first parts of it is the management's discussion analysis. We call it the MD&A. That is probably, it's a really kind of a nice section of the CAFR. What it does is it gives the financial overview. It provides a background to how the city is set up, regards to the financial statements, also how the fund structure is set up for our city. It also does a great job of kind of summarizing some of the major changes that took place for that year. So if somebody wants to just kind of see what happened and it's more of a condensed without looking at financial statements, the MD&A is really a nice one to look at. The next one that most like to review is page 28 and 30. Those are the balance sheet and the statement of revenue and expenditures for our governmental funds. That's where the general fund sits and the capital improvement fund are. In 17, when we look at that, we were able to see that both the general fund and the capital improvement fund increased their fund balance. We like to see that. That's always good when we continue to grow the fund balance versus take away from it. Another interesting point is if you would look at those, and then if you go further in the book, it's page 67 and 68. That's an interesting group of spreadsheets too. That's our budget to actuals. And that then shows you, for the general fund and the capital improvement fund, for the budget of 17, we start out with our original, and then it goes to any amendments that were made to the budget, and then it shows the final, the actual true expenditures and revenues. And you can see from that, if you look at those, that there again, our revenues came in over budget, and our expenditures came in under budget of both the general and the capital improvement fund, that's a positive. We like to see that. When you look at the governmental funds, one thing that's kind of tough is the special revenue funds are kind of all grouped together in one big number. So if you actually want to dive in and see what the special revenue funds had as far as their balance sheet and their statement of revenues and expenditures, that's page 80 and 82 covers that. That would be the Park and Rec, the BBB fund, the Wellness Center. That's where you're going to see the detail of those instead of just the basic financial statements at the beginning. Another very interesting part of the CAFR is page 112 starts the statistical section of the CAFR. That's a great place if you want to see anything that's happened in the last 10 years. It covers everything from our changes of our fund balance, property tax valuation, property tax rates. The other one that I know a lot of people have been asking recently is about the debt. Debt has become kind of a question. Table 13, it's page 126 of the CAFR, that shows our debt over the last 10 years, and it also shows our available debt capacity. What that does is there are limitations to what a city can have for debt. That's by the Constitution. It's 5% of our assessed value of our properties. So at the bottom of that, it shows that at the end of 2017, we had about 47 million available debt capacity. Now, we want to be careful too when we see that number, that just because we have the capacity doesn't mean we have the cash flow to cover that. So you want to take that with a grain of salt, because that's a pretty high. That's saying we can have up to 85 million of debt, but you have to have the cash flow to pay for those loans. So, then the other part of the CAFR that is for anybody who's seeing numbers on the financial statements but wants to have a little bit more detail, the notes section of the CAFR, it starts on page 39. That's really the section of the CAFR that you can see. So if you want to know what all the receivables are, that'll dive into the different types of receivables, the interest receivable, accounts receivable, items like that, and you can see it for the funds. It also, if you want to know what each one of the loans looks like as far as the principal and interest payment, and when those loans will become, when they mature, that's all in there. So the note section is kind of your detail. So if you look at the face value or the face of a financial statement and you want to kind of know where some other numbers are coming from, the note section is the part of the CAFR that you'd really want to look at to identify what it's kind of covering. So, like I said, Troy will be here at the council meeting to give the actual audit report. But I guess what I would say is if somebody just kind of wanted to see some of the key points of the city, I think the MD&A would be the one to read. It gives you the structure of how our city's set up. It also gives some key changes that happened in that current year. And then I think the statistical is kind of interesting to see how the city of Watertown has grown. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. Councilman Vilhauer?
I want to thank you, Kristen. I was one that put or suggested that we spend a few minutes doing this evening. I just like to add a few comments too. One of the things that I know the finance office doesn't like to pat itself on the back, but there's one page in here where they received Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. It comes from the Government Finance Office Association. This for the 2016 report. That was the 35th year in a row that our finance office has received that award. So I really think that is remarkable in the effort in the regards that what is put forth. It doesn't say that we've been strong financially for 35 years. It just says that over the course of time, this document is being put together the way it's supposed to be and presenting the information that is needed to us as council members as well as the public. So I'm not sure when the 2017 when that award will come out, but I'm guessing we're hoping to get that again for 2017. So kudos to the finance office over the years. Something else, and again, Troy will hit on this, to me an important, and I guess as an accountant by trade, the independent auditor's report is critical in here. And again, Troy will talk about that a little bit later, but we were given what I would call a clean opinion by the William Neal firm as far as the procedures that they did in conjunction with the 2017 audit. I think that's important. This is the one time or the one document where we see our city finances pulled together. Sure, we go through the budgeting process. We talk about sales tax. We see sales tax revenue numbers every month. We approve the bills as part of our consent agenda every month. But this is the one time that we do get a comprehensive look at our city finances. So this is an important document. And I would encourage us as council members and the public in general to take a look, because there's an awful lot of information here that is valuable. So again, I want to thank you, Kristen, for doing that.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. All right. Is there any old business anyone needs to talk about? Any new business? We do not have a reason to go into executive session, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilman Wise, second by Councilman Lallam. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. We are adjourned. Motion carries, and we'll be back at 5:30 for the council meeting.